It was supposed to be the kind of flight you forget the moment you land, just a calm afternoon drifting above the clouds. But at 29,000 feet, the aircraft suddenly shuddered, then went silent. Both engines had died. Nearly 300 people were trapped inside a falling giant with only minutes left before impact. Panic spread. Oxygen masks dangled. The captain's voice cracked over the intercom, trying to sound calm while the plane slipped into a deadly glide. And in the middle of all, that chaos. A quiet woman in seat 7F stood up. Nobody knew her name. But when she walked toward the cockpit with that steady, unshakable focus, the entire fate of the flight shifted. Minutes later, 2 fighter jets roared into formation beside the dying airliner, and when they heard her voice over the radio, those elite pilots did something almost no one has ever seen from the sky's most feared warriors. They saluted. Who was this hidden legend? Why was she pretending to be just another passenger? And what happened inside that cockpit that day? Before we dive into the full story, comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. The flight had taken off, just like any other smooth climb. Soft sunlight pouring through the windows, flight attendants rolling carts down the aisles with practiced ease. People sipped their sodas, watched movies, scrolled through their phones. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. It was one of those peaceful stretches of sky where time feels slow and safe. Up in the cockpit, the crew followed routine checklists. In the cabin, a couple argued about legroom. A kid pressed his face to the window and tired. Business travelers dozed beneath thin blue blankets. The engines hummed their steady, familiar rhythm. And then there was the woman in seat 7F. She blended in perfectly plain clothes, hair tied back, no jewelry except a simple watch. She looked like someone heading to visit family, or returning from a business trip, or maybe just escaping for a weekend. Nothing about her drew attention, just another passenger on just another quiet flight. If anyone had looked closely, maybe they'd have noticed something: how still she sat, how her breathing barely changed, how her posture had a subtle readiness to it, but no one was paying attention. Why would they? No one on that plane could have imagined that within the next hour, every rule, every assumption, and every bit of normalcy would shatter. And the woman everyone overlooked would become the one person standing between life and unthinkable disaster. If anyone on that plane had known who she really was, it would have stared in disbelief, because the woman sitting quietly in 7F wasn't just experience. She was one of the most decorated aviators her country had ever produced. Her real name was buried behind so many layers of classification that only a handful of military officials had clearance to even whisper it. But her call sign, Falconer, was spoken with reverence in elite training rooms around the world. For nearly 4 decades, she'd lived in the sky. She'd started in tiny training aircraft that rattled in the wind, moved on to high performance jets that could rip a human body apart if flown wrong, and eventually graduated into experimental fighters that operated at speeds most pilots never reached even once. She'd flown missions that would never make the news, intervened in conflicts that officially never happened, pulled off maneuvers that instructors still taught, but only after redacting entire pages of tactical notes. Her record wasn't impressive. It was unbelievable. Yet here she was, dressed in jeans and a dull blue sweater, sitting among tourists and business travelers like she was nobody, and that was exactly how she wanted it. After retiring from active service, she built her life around anonymity. She took commercial flights often, moving like a ghost, never drawing attention, never leaving a trace, never revealing who she used to be. Blending into crowds had become second nature, a skill nearly as polished as her flying. To the flight attendants, she was just another passenger. To the man beside her, she was just someone to make small talk with. To everyone else, she was invisible. But her instincts, those never retired. Even with her eyes closed, her mind still read aircraft the way musicians read music without effort. Every vibration, every subtle shift in engine pitch, every tremble of the fuselage told a story. And on this flight, the story was changing. Something was wrong. Quiet at first, almost unnoticeable. But she felt it. And she knew long before anyone else that the sky was about to turn hostile. Asterisk, asterisk, the first sign came as a tiny tremor. So light, most people thought it was just a bump in the air. But not her. Falconer's eyes snapped open instantly. That subtle vibration had a rhythm she recognized from a lifetime in the cockpit. It wasn't turbulence. It was mechanical. And it was getting worse. For a moment, the shudder faded, and the cabin returned to its quiet hum. Passengers kept sipping drinks, scrolling screens, oblivious. But she stayed alert, listening not with her ears, but with that trained sense pilots develop after thousands of hours in the sky. 3 minutes later, it hit again, harder. The plane lurched sideways, not wildly, but with a stiffness that told her it wasn't weather. Something deeper in the aircraft was failing. Then the seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice followed, steady, but too steady. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats. She heard what most people couldn't. The forced calm, the tight breath, the strain underneath. The words. The flight attendants heard it too. They moved faster than usual, faces composed, but steps a little too urgent. Then the drop happened. A violent, stomach-lifting plunge that slammed passengers back into their seats and sent a few loose items drifting upward like they were underwater. Screams erupted through the cabin. A baby wailed. Someone prayed loudly. Falconer grabbed the armrests, not out of fear, but calculation, feeling the angle, the descent rate, the way the wings reacted. This wasn't turbulence at all. Up front, the pilots were fighting a machine that was no longer obeying. The captain wrestled with controls that felt mushy, delayed like the plane was separated from his hands by layers of broken machinery. Warning lights flashed like a Christmas display gone mad. The first officer called out failures faster than he could process them. Hydraulics dropping, computers glitching, systems tying themselves in knots. Then the left engine died. A jolt ripped through the aircraft as the thrust vanished on one side. The pilots tried to compensate, but the controls were barely responding, and then the right engine flickered red. A second later, it went dead. Silence filled the sky outside. A 200-ton airliner became nothing but a falling glider with 280 lives on board. In the cabin, fear was spreading like fire. A man in row 14 began sobbing uncontrollably. A teenager clutched her phone, typing what looked like final goodbyes.
Ow.
Elderly couple leaned toward each other, their hands trembling but interlocked. Falconer exhaled once. Slow, steady. She'd felt emergencies before engine fires. Combat damage, systems collapsing mid-mission. But this was a full cascade. The kind pilots spent their entire careers praying they'd never face. And she knew the brutal truth. If someone didn't step in soon, the plane had minutes before gravity finished what the failures had started. She unbuckled her seatbelt. And, for the first time since takeoff, she stood. Asterisk, the businessman beside her, grabbed her arm the second she stood. Ma'am, sit down. The plane's in an emergency. She met his panic with a calm so absolute it froze him. I know, she said quietly. That's why I can't stay here. Before he could react, she slipped past him and moved up the aisle. Passengers stared at her, wide-eyed, clinging to armrests, as the aircraft trembled through another uncontrolled dip. A flight attendant rushed toward her, blocking the path with shaking hands. Ma'am, you have to sit down. Please, please. This is serious. Falconer's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. I understand exactly how serious. Both engines are gone. You're losing hydraulic pressure. Your pilots are running out of options. The attendant froze, her breath catching. How do you know that? 'Cause I've lived through this kind of failure before, Falconer said. I can help. Let me through. Something in her eyes. Something sharp. Steady. Unshaken made the flight attendant step aside. Falconer walked straight to the cockpit door and knocked 3 times. A pattern that carried unspoken authority. The door cracked open. Another flight attendant peeked out, panic etched across her face. Falconer leaned forward. Tell the captain a former military pilot with advanced emergency experience needs to speak with him right now. Tell him now. Door shut again. 10 seconds passed. The longest 10 seconds imaginable. Behind her, passengers wept, prayed, held each other as the cabin listed gently left. Then right signs the aircraft was losing stability fast. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain. Reeves' face appeared sweaty, pale eyes darting with the cold terror of someone holding on to control by a single thread. You're serious? He forced out. Falconer nodded once. How much altitude? 22,000 feet, dropping 500 a minute. Hydraulics almost gone, both engines dead, flight computers glitching. He swallowed hard. I've got nothing. Stepped inside. In an instant, her entire demeanor changed. Her eyes swept across every screen, every gauge, every warning light, absorbing the full catastrophe in seconds. Not panicking, not hesitating, just calculating. Both pilots stared at her, this stranger who suddenly looked like she belonged more in their cockpit than they did. You still have more than you think, she said. You've got emergency power, partial manual control, and just enough altitude. That means we can still save this aircraft. If we stop treating this like a commercial emergency and start treating it like a tactical one. The first officer blinked at her. Who are you? Falconer didn't answer that. Instead, she pointed at their failing systems. Captain, I need you to trust me. I'm going to walk you through procedures that aren't in your manuals. He hesitated. Every rule he'd ever trained under told him never to let a civilian take command. But every flashing red warning light said they were minutes from impact, and her voice steady, grounded. CERN felt like the only solid thing left in the sky. So he nodded. Tell me what to do. Falconer took the captain's shoulder, looked him squarely in the eye, and said the words that would decide the fate of nearly 300 people. Then listen carefully. Because we're going to attempt something most pilots only see in simulations, and even then they don't survive it. The cockpit fell silent. The plane continued its deadly glide, and the real fight for those 280 lives began. Asterisk, asterisk, from the moment Falconer took command of the chaos-filled cockpit, everything changed. The fear didn't disappear, but it had direction. Now, purpose. Captain Reeves and his first officer clung to her voice like it was the only thing keeping them from falling out of the sky. Falconer scanned the controls again.
Trust her this time.
First officer, calculate our glide ratio manual. Don't trust the computer. Captain, pull up your hydraulic schematic. We're going to reroute what little pressure you have left. Reeves stared at her. That system isn't even supposed to be accessible manually? It is, she said. It's just not taught at your level. Her fingers flew across switches and circuit breakers, activating backup paths the pilots didn't even know existed. She explained each step with calm, precision, short, clipped instructions broken down into logic they could follow despite the panic clawing at them. Every second mattered. Captain, adjust pitch 2 degrees up, not 3. 2. Trust the airspeed, not your instincts. He followed her command, hands trembling, sweat dripping down his temples. The plane stabilized, barely, but enough for breathing room. Next, she guided the first officer through aerodynamic calculations. Commercial pilots, rarely used. Military test pilots? Yes. Combat aviators? Yes. But airline crews? Never. You're telling us to glide this thing like a damaged fighter jet? The first officer whispered. Falconer didn't look up, because right now that's exactly what it is. They were still losing altitude fast, but now the descent had shape a plan, measurable path instead of freefall. Then Falconer asked the question that would decide everything. What's our nearest possible landing site? The first officer refreshed the navigation display. There's a regional airstrip 40 miles out. Runway's short, too short for an aircraft this size. It's long enough if we come in steep, Falconer said. Reeves stared at her as if she'd gone insane. Steep? We'll overshoot or stall? You'll do neither, she said. Simply, not if you hit the angles I give you. Then the radio crackled. United 903. Say again? Do you say emergency procedures are being coordinated by? Falconer. The controller's tone shifted instantly. The humans outside this cockpit now recognized the name. They understood what it meant. Affirmative, Reeves answered, though it sounded more like a question. There was a pause. Long. 1. Then, copy, be advised. Military assets are being scrambled to your position. Falconer didn't react. She expected that. And moments later, 2 blips appeared on the radar heading straight toward them at impossible speed. Captain Reeves looked at Falconer. You knew this would happen. I know my call sign, she said, eyes still locked on the failing instruments. And they know I wouldn't be here unless things were very, very bad. Below the clouds, 2 streaks of silver approached. The skies were about to get crowded, and the stakes were about to get even higher. Asterisk, asterisk. 2 fighter jets burst through the cloud layer like metallic predators, sleek, fast, and terrifyingly precise. They slid into formation on either side of the crippled airliner, their wingtips nearly level with the passenger windows. Inside those jets were 2 of the best pilots in the country, Major Holt and Captain Rivera. They'd been on routine patrol. When the emergency call came through, first, they expected a standard escort, but then they heard the name Falconer. Both pilots froze. Every pilot knew that call sign. It was spoken in classrooms, whispered in debriefings, buried in classified footage. Holt's voice trembled as he radioed in. United 903. This is Sabre 1. Confirm. Falconer is aboard your aircraft. Falconer took the radio. Sabre 1. This is Falconer. I need real-time wind shear and updated glide path verification. We're attempting an emergency landing with degraded control authority. Tight margins. For a moment, Holt didn't speak. Falconer's voice, the legend alive, real, speaking to him, hit him like a shockwave. Finally, copy, Falconer. Data incoming. And, ma'am, it's an honor. Rivera's voice cut in next. Falconer, Sabre 2. We're reading your glide path. Your window is razor thin. You'll hit runway threshold with maybe 80 seconds of usable altitude. Left Falconer nodded. That's more than I need. Back in the cockpit, Captain Reeves stared at her in disbelief. These pilots. They're treating you like a commander. Falconer didn't look at him. They're treating me like someone who should have died a long time ago, but didn't. The airliner hit another pocket of dead air and rolled slightly. Reeves fought the controls, sweat soaking his collar. Easy, Falconer said. Counter roll with gentle trim. That's it. Keep it smooth. They cleared another cloud bank. And the airport tiny, far too short. Nothing like the long runways the plane required finally came into view. Falconer switched back to the radio. Sabre. Flight, maintain formation. KO, need your sensors during final approach. Affirmative, Holt replied. We're with you the whole way. Then something happened that made the captain freeze mid-movement. Falconer reached for the frequency. Used only by active-duty tactical teams, one she should not have access to. Sabre flight. This is Falconer, she said. Thank you for responding. There was a beat of silence. Then on both sides of the cockpit windows, the fighter pilots raised their gloved hands to their helmets and saluted. A salute from elite warriors to a ghost of the sky who wasn't supposed to exist anymore? Captain Reeves whispered. They're saluting. You Falconer didn't smile, didn't blink. We're not done yet, she said, eyes on the runway drawing closer. Focus. The real danger was seconds away. And now came the part almost no pilot in the world had ever executed outside a simulator and survived. Asterisk, the runway rushed toward them small, possibly short, like a strip of pavement carved into the earth just to mock their odds. The cockpit vibrated violently now, every warning light flashing, every alarm screaming. They were out of time, out of altitude, out of second chances. Airspeed 162, the first officer choked out. Hold it, Falconer said. Do not. Let it bleed off. Captain Reeves' hand shook on the yoke. This approach is too steep. This isn't survivable. Yes, it is, Falconer said firmly. Trust the numbers, not your fear. The nose shuddered. The wings flexed under the strain. Sabre 1 to Falconer. Major Holt radioed in. Sensors confirm you are right on the edge. You've got 0 buffer. 0 copy, she replied. Stay tight. The fighters tightened their formation, silent guardians on each side of the doomed airliner. At 1,500 feet above ground, Falconer issued the order. Landing gear, now. The manual crank groaned. A thud shook the plane as the gear locked into place, adding brutal drag. The nose dipped sharply. Reeves fought it with everything he had. Hold it, Falconer murmured. You're doing fine. At 800 feet, the runway no longer looked like a landing strip, looked like a target. First stage flaps, she commanded. The moment the flaps deployed, the aircraft lurched. Passengers screamed. Cockpit alarms erupted again. Falconer didn't react. She kept her voice steady, guiding Reeves through angle corrections only someone with her background would dare attempt. Sabre flight. She radioed confirm wind shear. Minimal, Rivera answered. But you've got a crosswind pushing you 2 degrees, right? Reeves corrected, sweat dripping off his chin. His breaths came in sharp, panicked bursts. Captain, Falconer said softly, look at me. Tore his gaze away from the chaos and locked onto her eyes. Breathe. He inhaled shakily. Now fly. He nodded. The runway threshold was seconds away. Full flaps on my mark, Falconer said. The first officer's hand trembled over. The lever 3. The ground rushed upward. 2. The cockpit shook so hard the instruments blurred. 1. Mark. The flaps slammed into full extension. The plane bucked like a living creature fighting gravity itself. The nose dropped violently. Alarms blared. The cabin erupted in screams. Counter with pitch now, Falconer ordered. Reeves hauled back. On the yoke, the nose lifted at the last possible second. And then, bam. The main landing gear hit the runway so hard the entire aircraft rattled like a struck drum. The plane bounced just once before, slamming back down and gripping the asphalt. Hold it straight, Falconer shouted. Reeves activated every brake system still functioning. The runway markers whipped past, disappearing in a blur. 5,000 feet. Remaining. 4,000, 3,000, 2,000. The end of the runway hurtled toward. Then Falconer leaned in. Come on. 1,000 feet, 500 feet, and then the plane stopped, dead still, silent. A giant brought to rest mere yards before the grass began. For 3 long seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the ticking of stressed metal settling into stillness. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. **4. A heartbeat. The cockpit felt frozen in time. Captain Reeves still clutched the yoke like the world might vanish if he let go. The first officer covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking as adrenaline crashed through her. System then? Everything erupted at once. The radio flooded with voices out of controllers shouting in disbelief. Emergency crews confirming. They were racing toward the aircraft, and pilots on nearby frequencies murmuring things like impossible. And how did they survive that? Behind them, the cabin exploded, not in panic, but in pure, overwhelming emotion. Sobs, laughter, screams of relief. Passengers hugged total strangers, grabbing at one another like they needed proof they were still alive. Parents held their kids with trembling arms. A teenage girl stared at the final message. She'd typed to her mother and started crying all over again. The elderly couple who'd held hands during the fall now leaned against each other, weeping not from fear, but from gratitude. And through it all, Falconer stood, silent, steady, like the eye of a storm that had finally passed. Captain Reeves reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip trembling with everything he couldn't put into words. You can't just leave, he said. I need to know, who are you? What branch? What aircraft did you fly? What did you used to? Falconer shook her head gently. I'm someone who was trained for days like this, she said. Someone who spent her life in the sky. Someone who knew what to do when everything went wrong. Reeves' voice cracked. Don't downplay it. Without you, we wouldn't have made it 8 more minutes. We'd be a crater in the ground right now. Before Falconer could answer, the radio cracked again. Sabre 1 to Falconer. Emergency vehicles are on scene. We will hold formation until you are safely off the aircraft. And ma'am, for what it's worth, watching you work today was the greatest honor of my flying career. Falconer looked out the window. The two fighter jets still hovered in perfect formation, guarding her. And then she noticed something else. Both pilots raised their hands again, saluting from their cockpits. A gesture of respect so rare, so deeply meaningful. It stole the breath from everyone who saw it. The first officer whispered they're saluting her. Passengers were crowding the front of the cabin now, desperate to see the woman who had saved them. Flight attendants tried to keep some order, but relief and gratitude had turned into an unstoppable tide. Some people wanted to shake her hand. Some wanted to hug her. Some simply wanted to look her in the eyes and say thank you. Falconer lifted her hands, a quiet signal for calm. The chaos dimmed instantly. Please, she said. Act! Evacuate the aircraft. Your families are waiting. They need to know you're alive. People hesitated just for a moment before slowly filing toward the exits. Every single one stole one last glance at her before stepping out onto the runway. Captain Reeves stood in the doorway, watching her as if she were a miracle walking, because deep down he knew she was. Falconer remained in the cockpit as the last passengers stepped onto the runway, still shaking, still whispering to each other about the mysterious woman from seat 7F who had saved them all. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft, staring up with a mix of awe and disbelief. Many of them had listened to the radio transmissions and already knew this landing would be talked about for decades, Captain. Reeves blocked the doorway as she tried to step out. Please, he said softly. Just tell me something, anything. Your real name? Your unit? The planes you flew? Anything. Falconer studied him for a long, quiet moment, long enough that he wondered if she would simply walk past him without a word. Instead, she reached into her pocket and handed him a simple white card. On it was a single phone number. Nothing else. When you call, she said, they'll tell you what they can. They'll confirm the call sign. They'll confirm the service record. But they won't give you my name. That part stays buried. Reeves turned the card over in his hand, swallowing the emotion rising in his throat. There's one thing they won't tell you, Falconer added. What's that? He whispered. That I prefer being nobody? She offered him a small, tired smile, the smile of someone who had carried too many missions, too many secrets, too many worlds on her shoulders. Then she stepped past him and down the narrow aisle, outside the moment she appeared in the aircraft doorway. Several members of the emergency response team snapped to attention uniforms crisp. Boots polished, and they saluted her with absolute precision. This time she returned the salute. No hiding, no anonymity. Just a quiet acknowledgement between warriors. She descended the stairs, stepped across the asphalt, and climbed into a plain, unmarked sedan waiting at the edge of the runway. The driver said nothing. He didn't need to. Or rather, he knew enough to never ask before the door closed. Falconer pulled out her phone and typed a short message to a secure number. Anonymity compromised. No casualties. Mission complete. The reply came seconds later. Understood. You did well. Resume low-profile travel tomorrow. She deleted both messages, leaned back, and closed her eyes. Because tomorrow, she'd be back to boarding planes as a nobody. Back to blending in. Back to seat 7F or 12C or 22A. Just another traveler people forget the moment. They walk past her, and that was exactly how she liked it. She served her country from the shadows for most of her life. And when the world needed her again, just for 8 impossible minutes, she stepped out of the shadows and saved nearly 300 souls. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need recognition. She certainly didn't need fame. She needed only the quiet comfort of knowing she'd been exactly where she was supposed to be at the moment it mattered most. As the sedan pulled away and dusk settled over the airfield, Captain Reeves stood with the white card in his hand. Watching her disappear into the distance, he knew, without question, he'd just met someone whose existence most people would never believe. A legend who chose to live unseen? A guardian who walked among ordinary people? A warrior who would always move in silence till the moment the world needed her again.